discuss the injections, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on, what are the traditional mechanisms and how is this one different?
Yeah, so some people don't even want to call it the V word, right?
Right.
The vax. They're like, it's not, it's a pharmaceutical injection or it's a pharmaceutical therapeutic drug or whatever it is. Because traditionally, a vax was basically a live or inactive virus or germ that was injected into somebody on a small level, and then you build an immune response, usually antibodies, to fight against that at the time, and then that your body saves in memory to fight if it gets exposed to that germ later.
Right.
However, these don't work that way. It's a little bit more advanced. It's kind of like instead of injecting a little bit of peanut, like an allergy shot, because a lot of times a vax works like an allergy shot. You inject a little bit of peanut to build up your immune system, like an allergy shot to the peanut. But instead of injecting a little bit of virus or a little bit of peanut, the antigen that you react to, you're injecting the cookbook. So you're injecting the mRNA, which then tells your ribosomes, which is like your protein making factory in the cells, it's a messenger RNA, which is basically the code or the recipe in the cookbook. You're injecting the cookbook.
And it's a synthetic messenger RNA,
It's a synthetic messenger RNA created in the lab that basically tells your body to cook up a spike protein or a spike protein fragment. And basically you create the peanut, you create the spike protein fragment instead of injecting it. So it's like one extra step. Rather than injecting the germ itself, they're injecting a piece of the germ. And the thought was that then you're less likely to get sick from the injection. But they're actually finding there's a lot more reported reactions than ever before, which is not really great. But what happens is you create this spike protein fragment. It usually lasts just a few days in your body. They say it only stays local to the injection site, but they're actually finding it lodged in the lung and kidney and other sites. So it likely spreads throughout your body, and you build antibodies up against it. And in 2 weeks, you have a pretty good antibody response to those spike protein fragments, and they end up degrading, and you're left with generally a really, really high level of antibodies against the spike protein.
So that would be the mRNA technology. There's also one that uses a viral vector to the DNA.
Yes.
Can you explain a little how those differ and what the pros and cons might be?
Yep. So the mRNA is almost the same as the DNA injections, except the DNA injections have one more step, which is so it's one more step. And then the other difference is that the mRNA used in order to get that mRNA into the cell, then encapsulate it in something called PEG, which is like a lipid coating or shell to then shuttle the mRNA into each cell. Whereas the DNA, instead of using a PEG encapsulation, they use an adenovirus encapsulation, which is kind of like a cold. It's another type of virus. This is a monkey virus that they haven't really used
I heard
before.
It was chimpanzee. Is it monkey?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, maybe chimpanzee. Yeah, it's basically a non-human virus from some type of ape that was then shuttles the DNA into the cell. And then the DNA goes to the nucleus, like the heart of where your own DNA is. And the DNA acts as another cookbook or code to create mRNA. And then this process becomes the same. So basically the DNA is the same kind of steps as the mRNA, just has a different encapsulation to get the DNA into the cell. And there's one more step because the DNA goes to your own DNA, creates mRNA, which then creates the spike protein. So it's one added step.
Okay. And can you, for my audience, I think a lot of people don't know what PEG is, and I think there are some potential consequences with PEG.
Yes. So PEG is polyethylene glycol. It's in a lot of cosmetics and foods, and it can be really harmful. It's considered one of the 5 most toxic ingredients in cosmetics. Even though people are well, I put it all over myself. I'm well, why do you also think a lot of people get cancer? 50% of women get cancer. So why do you think women get more cancer than men? It's probably because they're more sensitive to hormone disrupting chemicals, one of which could be PEG. Or plastics and all the chemicals we're surrounded with on our furniture and car fumes and all the stuff. food. So it's just one more chemical. So it's likely not going to be a huge deal, but it is somewhat concerning that we're injecting it rather than putting it topically on us or consuming it edibly in certain foods, because PEG, polyethylene glycol, is if you just Google like PEG carcinogenic,
Right.
usually it says, yes, it is likely carcinogenic because it's almost always contaminated with something called EO, ethylene oxide, which is like a 10 out of 10 carcinogen. Also, both are considered reproductive or fetal toxins.
Right.
And there's no real proof of whether or not the EO is in the jab or not, in the injection. However, the only research that has been done, basically I'm doing, which is I have it on like 3 patients now, and that's it. It's only 3 people because no one wants to actually test and find out. But there's a breakdown product of EO called HEMA, which is like 2-beta hydroxyl ethyl mercapturic acid. Basically, it's like we're finding that people are peeing out the breakdown of ethylene oxide. And when we test the before and after of their urine after the injections, we're finding that there's this breakdown of ethylene oxide in their urine in a much higher level after they took the injection, which means we can kind of deduce that they're getting some dose of PEG ethylene oxide in the breakdown HEMA. And the good news is they're peeing it out. The bad news is it's getting injected into them. And PEG can cause systemic toxicity or allergic reactions. It's not common that it's an allergic reaction. It's not common that systemic toxicity, but even PEG in cosmetics on like an open wound can cause infections or problems for people.